Hey everyone, Natalie Teston, family law lawyer here in Gainesville, Georgia. I wanted to come on today to talk to you about mediation. Mediation is a non-adversarial process that is commonly used to resolve our family law cases. Since it's a non-adversarial process, what that means is we try to check the ugliness at the door and instead cooperate, compromise with each other, see if we can collaborate in order to reach an agreement that works for everybody. If you settle your case at mediation, typically you're going to settle between what we think is your worst and best possible days in court. You're going to be faced with a lot of options at mediation. If we get to a spot where we feel like accepting this offer, or if they accept our offer, makes sense to resolve the case that way versus incurring the cost and the risk associated with a court hearing, that's typically where you're going to land in mediation to resolve your case. There's usually no big winners and no big losers at mediation. That's not always the case after a family law contested hearing, right, in front of the judge. If you are in our Northeast Georgia area, chances are that you're going to be court ordered to attend mediation before you bring your case before the court for a final hearing. And there are a few reasons for that. Number one, mediation works. In many cases, some of the most contested cases out there can actually be resolved at mediation with a trained professional mediator and everyone's undivided attention and willingness to consider options, make offers, and try to reach an agreement, right? The stats are out there too. If you reach an agreement in your case, then you are less likely to end up back in court for a contempt action or a modification case. Or perhaps you need one modification versus 3 or 4. So the stats are out there and the judges know that. Also, keep in mind that while our judges are wonderful in this area, they are constrained by the constraints of court, right? First of all, we usually don't have but a few hours of the court's time. It is very difficult to cram a 20-year marriage and 3 children with various needs into a 2 or 3 hour presentation for the court. We have to hit the highlights. That's all we're allowed to do. That's all we have time to do, right? So a lot of the information doesn't quite make it to the judge to consider. Where in mediation, the folks that are making the decisions have lived this life, right? They are your children. No one better knows your children, your finances, what your future's looking like. Nobody knows that stuff better than you. So again, it would seem to reason that perhaps the best people to make these decisions for you is you, right? And your spouse on the other side, or the co-parent on the other side. And courts know that as well. At court, we are constrained by the rules of evidence. Another biggie that we have to consider in every case. Perhaps there's something out there that we think is very important. Well, if it's hearsay or we don't have it authenticated the right way, it doesn't make it into evidence. And so the court can't consider it. If the court can only make decisions based on the evidence that's actually presented and tendered into evidence. And so again, the court doesn't quite get the full flavor of the case. Yet we call on them to make the decisions when we can't agree. Judges rarely meet children. They're lucky if they see a picture of them. And then we leave it to them to make decisions on a parenting plan. That's a frightening day for any parent. It's risky. All lawyers have war stories out there where things didn't quite go their way and they just didn't see it coming. And so again, that's why when we start to consider mediation, whether that's a viable option or not. When you go to mediation, it's important to remember that mediation is a voluntary process. While you're court ordered perhaps to mediate, you're not necessarily court ordered to reach an agreement. So voluntary means after you've made your good faith effort, if you just don't think that this is being helpful and we're not reaching a resolution or getting closer to it, then you can walk. The lawyer can call it, the party can call it, the mediator can call it. If the mediator thinks that we're just not reaching any common ground here and that it's becoming a waste of time and money. At mediation in family law, typically the parties are separated for the entirety of the mediation. We still commonly do mediations on Zoom, even though we're not necessarily doing Zoom court anymore. Again, it just adds an extra layer of comfort and protection for the parties to feel safe, to open up, to tell us what they want, to tell us what's important to them, things of that nature. Our trained mediator, you have to be trained to be a mediator here in Georgia. There's extra training that you have to go to be a domestic relations mediator. And there's even additional training that you go to understand intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So our mediators in our family law cases are super trained individuals that know what they're doing. Those people will bounce back and forth between the parties to see what's important to everybody, to see what each party thinks is a proposed resolution to resolve the issues. The mediator will try to find some common ground. The mediator may suggest things. There's a certain beauty of being in both rooms. Maybe that mediator sees that these people aren't as far apart as everyone thinks, right? And so sometimes mediators can come up with creative solutions that nobody ever thought of, right? That actually resolve our cases. In mediation, the mediator gets paid that day. They're billing hourly, so that you get what you pay for. Their rates usually fall somewhere between $150 and $300 to $350 an hour, depending on the particular person that you use. Certainly the more experienced folks are going to charge more than some of the newbies out there. And the mediator's fees are equally divided between the parties. The mediator's role is to be a neutral. They don't take a side at all. And so if you're equally dividing payment for the mediator, that helps to maintain their air of neutrality. If an agreement is reached at mediation, then we will draft it up. That can either be bullet points, you know, if we settle your case at 4:45 or 5:30 at night, may not make sense to draft a whole settlement agreement and keep everyone there till 9, 10 o'clock at night. So if we kind of settle later in the day, we may just do some bullet points and we take that and go make pretty documents with it later. Or if it's a case where we've kind of already been kicking around offers, or we settle a little bit earlier in the day, we may just bust out all the paperwork at that point. Everyone signs, we email it to the judge, you get an email a day or two later, your case is over. That's obviously the preferred option, but sometimes we just due to time issues can only get some bullet points out there. If you reach an agreement at mediation and you're represented by counsel, you are bound to that agreement. There is no thinking about it later and changing your mind. So that's why we tell people, do your homework before mediation. You need to know what the value of your home is. You need to know what your credit card debts are. You need to know if you qualify for a loan. You need to know what houses are selling for, what apartments are renting for, where the school zone lands. You gotta know all that stuff before you go to mediation. If you don't, then you could be agreeing to something that doesn't really work that well, or creates a situation that you never really had in mind. So we want to do our homework on the front end to make sure that we're prepped and ready to go. Typically, when we go to mediation, we've got what we call a basic case information sheet. It's a summary of all your financial issues. Typically, we've got a proposed parenting plan and child support worksheets there also. A lot of times we hand that information to the mediator just to bring them up to speed. We don't want to pay lots of money and lots of time to bring a mediator up to speed. We need to be able to hand them some summaries to get them going pretty quickly so that we can spend our time trying to hash through the details, not educating the mediator, if that makes sense. And parties generally, after mediation, there's, not always, but sometimes a buyer's remorse, right? We feel this when we buy a car or house or anything else. So anytime there's a big decision that can happen, we typically tell folks, take a breath, see if in a day or two it passes, and for the vast majority of folks, it does. There's a certain beauty and intangible value on bringing closure to your family law case, right? In a way that doesn't involve a public airing of all of your dirty laundry. That's a rough day for anybody, even if you're the better spouse. Everyone's messed up. Everyone's got a suspicious financial transaction in their bank account. And having that put on full display in an open public courtroom where your friends and family are being called in to testify, that's a rough day. We do it frequently, and we're not afraid to go there, but we need to consider alternatives to that as well, especially when you've got minor children, right? If you can resolve your case at mediation and you don't have an ugly day at court, it may set you up for a better co-parenting relationship and situation going forward. It's easier for the dust to settle if you can reach an agreement in mediation rather than have a contested, ugly hearing for multiple hours where I have to cross-examine that spouse, and I have to do it really well, and I will. So that can create a lot of havoc that takes longer to get over. And your kids are only children once. They've got one childhood, and you need to share in the raising of them as best as you can. So again, there's a lot of that sort of intangible value that we have to consider in our family law cases. When we go to mediation, does it make sense to accept this offer or does it not? If you've got any more questions on mediation, drop it in the comments below and I'll try to address those. Hope everyone's doing well out there. Hope everyone had a good holiday season, and we'll see you next time.